The blizzard swallowed the last train before midnight. By the time she stepped into the station, the tracks had already disappeared under white silence. He was still there, behind the counter, beneath the dim winter lights, as if the years between them had only been a delayed departure. "No more trains tonight," he said quietly. The board flickered once, then darkness. Outside, the storm erased every way out. Inside, there was only unfinished history. And as the station lights began to fail, she understood. This time, leaving would not be the hardest part. Staying would.
If you find comfort in slow, emotional stories like this, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.
She hadn't meant to arrive at night. The bus from the city was supposed to reach the town just before sunset, while there was still enough light to make everything look smaller than memory. But winter rearranges time. Roads slow. Schedules shift. By the time she stepped off at the nearly empty stop, the sky had already turned the pale blue of oncoming snow. Elena hadn't been back in 7 years. The town greeted her the way small towns do, without drama. The same bakery on the corner, the same pharmacy window with handwritten signs, the same church steeple cutting into the low sky. Nothing accused her, nothing welcomed her. That felt worse. She carried only one suitcase. It wasn't heavy, but her hand kept adjusting its grip as if she were still deciding whether she would stay long enough to unpack. The train station sat at the edge of town, near the frozen river. It had always felt slightly apart from everything else, a place built for leaving. She hadn't planned to go there first, but her feet remembered the route. The platform was quiet when she approached. A thin layer of snow gathered along the wooden benches. The metal rails gleamed faintly under early evening light. Inside, the station was warmer than she expected. The heater hummed softly. A faint scent of old paper and engine oil lingered in the air. And there he was. Daniel stood behind the small operations desk, sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose as he studied a timetable. He looked older, not in a way that diminished him, but in a way that suggested patience had replaced restlessness. He looked up when the door closed behind her. For a second, neither of them moved. Recognition came slowly, not shock, not anger, just awareness. Elena. He said her name the way someone tests whether it still belongs in their mouth. She set her suitcase down carefully. "I heard you work nights now." His gaze shifted briefly to the windows, where snow had begun to gather more thickly. "I heard you left for something bigger," he replied. The sentence wasn't sharp. It was factual. She had left on a night train 7 winters ago. A scholarship, a city, a life she believed she needed more than him. Back then, the station lights had felt like witnesses. Now they hummed above them, steady and indifferent. "I didn't come to compare choices," she said. "Then why did you come?" The question hung between them, heavier than either of them expected. She had rehearsed this moment differently. In her mind, he would have been angrier or colder. Instead, he stood upright, composed, as if the years had built something solid inside him. "I'm here because my mother's house is being sold," she said. "I needed to sign the papers." A partial truth. The wind pushed against the station windows. Snow thickened outside, soft but persistent. He nodded once. Professional. "There's a storm warning," he said. "Last train leaves in 20 minutes. After that, everything shuts down." The word lingered. Shuts down. Elena looked toward the platform. For a flicker of a second, the old instinct returned, to board something moving, to let momentum decide. Instead, she stayed where she was. The heater clicked, the clock ticked. Snow continued its quiet accumulation. Daniel watched her with a restraint that felt deliberate. "You always did like departures," he said softly. "And you always stayed," she answered. Not accusation, not defense, just history, spoken plainly. Outside, the first gust of true wind arrived, sharper, colder, carrying the kind of snow that doesn't fall but drives. Inside the station, the lights glowed steadily above them. Neither of them realized yet that before the night was over, those lights would flicker, and neither of them knew that the last train leaving wasn't the only departure they would have to reconsider. The announcement came through the speaker in a voice too calm for the weather outside. Final departure to Northbridge, arriving in 5 minutes. Elena felt the sound settle into her chest. Northbridge. The city she had once chosen. The city that had reshaped her into someone who no longer apologized for ambition, who learned to speak louder in rooms that didn't wait. The platform doors slid open with a metallic sigh. Wind pushed snow into the station entrance before Daniel stepped forward to seal them again. He moved with practiced efficiency, checking signal lines, glancing at the old analog board, adjusting switches that had long outlived their era. "You should take it," he said without looking at her. It wasn't dismissal, it was habit. He had always made space for her leaving. The train's headlights appeared through the curtain of snow, 2 blurred halos in the growing storm. The ground trembled faintly beneath their feet. Elena walked toward the window, overlooking the tracks. 7 years ago, she had stood on this same platform with a ticket in her pocket and a future unfolding in straight lines ahead of her. Daniel had not asked her to stay. He had not chased the train. He had only stood beneath these lights and said quietly, "If you go, go fully." She had admired him for that. She had also resented him for it. The train pulled in with a long exhale of steam. Doors opened. Only 3 passengers stepped off. No one boarded. Daniel stepped outside to check the coupling lines. Coat pulled tight against the wind. Snow caught in his hair instantly. Elena watched him through the glass. He looked smaller out there, framed by the storm. Not diminished, just solitary. The kind of man who learns the rhythm of absence and survives it. A conductor leaned out of the train and called toward the station. "Storm's moving faster than predicted. We're not sure if we'll make the return." Daniel nodded once. Inside, Elena's gaze dropped to her suitcase. She could leave now, sign the papers tomorrow, catch a bus back to Northbridge, return to her apartment overlooking the river, to her life of measured independence. The door chimed softly, signaling boarding. The platform lights flickered once in the wind. Daniel stepped back inside just as the conductor gave the final call. "Last chance." The words landed between them, not as instruction, but as echo. Elena picked up her suitcase. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched her, not pleading, not detached, present. Snow battered the windows harder now, thick and insistent. She walked toward the platform doors. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar for a moment. Older, steadier, carrying both distance and return in the same expression. Her hand hovered near the handle. Behind her, Daniel's voice came, calm, almost neutral. "You don't owe this place anything." She turned. "And you?" she asked. The question was not about geography. It was about them. The train engine roared softly and idle. Daniel met her eyes. "I learned how to stay," he said. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than any confession would have. Outside, snow erased the tracks inch by inch. The conductor gave one last impatient whistle. Elena looked at the open door of the train. at the warmth spilling from inside, at the forward motion waiting. Then she looked back at the station lights above them, steady, fragile, human. For a moment time narrowed to the width of breath. The storm howled louder, and the choice that once felt inevitable now felt deliberate. The train doors closed with a final metallic echo, not because she stepped inside, but because she didn't. The engine pulled away slowly, cutting a fading line through snow that was already reclaiming the tracks. Within seconds, the red lights at the back of the last carriage blurred and vanished into white. Silence followed, not peaceful, just suspended. Daniel watched the disappearing train until it was nothing more than movement swallowed by weather. He didn't look at her immediately. He seemed to understand that this moment belonged to her alone. Elena felt something inside her settle, not triumph, not regret, just stillness. "I'm staying," she said. He nodded once. "I know." The storm intensified as if in response. Wind struck the windows in uneven waves. Snow began to collect along the door seams, pressing inward with quiet insistence. Daniel moved toward the control panel near the back wall. Old switches, fading labels. He lifted the receiver of a landline and listened. Static. "Signal lines are unstable," he murmured. "If the wind keeps up, we'll lose external contact." She placed her suitcase beside the wooden bench and removed her coat. The station felt warmer now, smaller too, more intimate under the soft overhead glow. "Does that happen often?" she asked. "Not like this." A gust rattled the roof, hard enough to make dust tremble from the beams above. One of the platform lights outside flickered twice and went out. Elena stepped closer to the window. The world beyond had turned almost indistinguishable, sky and ground merging into a single moving surface. She felt suddenly aware of the distance between them. The years layered like snowdrifts neither had fully crossed. "You could have left too," she said quietly. 7 years ago. Daniel adjusted a switch before answering. "I wasn't built for departure." "That's not true." He looked at her then, and there was something steady in his expression, not defensiveness, not sorrow, recognition. "I wasn't built for abandoning what matters," he corrected. The heater clicked, then hummed unevenly. Elena moved toward the small counter, separating the waiting area from the operations desk. The wood still bore faint scratches she remembered tracing with her fingers when she was younger, waiting for delayed trains. "You never asked me to stay," she said. "I didn't want you to stay because of me, and I didn't want to leave because of you." The admission felt heavier than the storm. Outside, the wind surged again. The station lights dimmed briefly, just enough for them to notice. Daniel reached instinctively for the manual generator switch near the wall. "If the power goes, we'll have emergency lamps for a few hours," he said. The professionalism in his tone felt almost protective, as if maintaining structure kept something more fragile from surfacing. Elena leaned back against the counter. "I thought leaving would make everything clearer," she said softly. "That distance would simplify what we were." "And did it?" She held his gaze. "No." The station clock ticked louder now that the storm muted everything else. Each second felt deliberate. Daniel stepped away from the controls and came around the counter. Not too close, just enough that they were standing in the same open space. The air between them carried warmth and something unresolved. "You came back for papers," he said. "Yes." "And for anything else?" The question was quiet, not confrontational, just honest. Another light outside flickered and died. Elena felt the shift, the subtle tightening of isolation. "I don't know," she admitted. A sharp crack sounded somewhere along the platform roof as snow collapsed from its edge. The emergency lights flickered on briefly, testing themselves. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then the storm picked an inconvenient night. She almost smiled, or a precise one. A sudden surge of wind hit the station, hard enough to make the overhead lights flicker again. Longer this time. For a heartbeat, the room dimmed to near shadow, and in that brief half-darkness, the distance between them felt less architectural and more human. Outside, the world had disappeared. Inside, there were only two people, and the conversation they had postponed for 7 winters. The next flicker would not be outside. It would be here. The power went out without ceremony. One steady glow, then nothing. The hum of the heater collapsed into silence. The clock stopped mid-tick. For a few seconds, the station existed only as a shape in darkness. Then the emergency lamps flickered on, low, amber, fragile. Snow lashed against the windows, like hands insisting on entry. The storm had erased the tracks completely now. Beyond the glass, there was no horizon, only motion and white. Daniel moved toward the generator room with a flashlight. Elena followed without being asked. The beam cut through dust and old wiring, revealing pipes that hadn't been replaced in decades. The station looked older in this light, less official, more exposed. "It'll hold," he said, adjusting a switch. "For a few hours." "For what?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. They returned to the main hall, now lit by soft emergency bulbs that cast long shadows across the wooden benches. The station felt smaller, closer. Every breath carried. Elena sat down. Daniel remained standing for a moment before taking the seat across from her, not beside her. The distance between them was no longer measured in miles. It was measured in sentences they had avoided. "You think I left because I loved the city more," she said. "I think you left because you were afraid of staying," he replied. She absorbed that. "And you think I wasn't?" He looked at her steadily. "You were afraid you'd resent me." The honesty was precise, almost surgical. Elena lowered her gaze to her hands. She had imagined this conversation 100 times in the city, on late nights when ambition felt hollow, when success felt quieter than she expected. "I was afraid," she said, "but not of you." The storm pressed harder against the roof. "I was afraid of becoming someone smaller," she continued, "of waking up 10 years later and wondering who I could have been." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "And I was afraid of watching you shrink just to make us work." Silence settled between them, not hostile, just heavy with clarity. She looked up. "You didn't fight for me." The words were not accusation, they were ache. "I thought loving you meant letting you go," he answered, "and I thought loving myself meant leaving." The symmetry of it stunned them both. Outside, something metallic crashed in the wind. A sign torn loose, perhaps. The building trembled faintly. The emergency lights dimmed for a second and returned. Elena felt the storm, not just around them, but inside her. The collision of past and present, of who she had been and who she was now. "I kept waiting for you to call," she said. Daniel exhaled. "I wrote letters." Her head lifted sharply. "What?" "I never sent them." The confession landed in the space between them like something fragile finally placed down. "Why?" "Because every time I tried, I realized I didn't want to interrupt the life you were building." She almost laughed, not with humor, but with disbelief. "And I didn't call because I didn't want you to think I regretted leaving." The emergency lights buzzed softly overhead. Two people, two versions of love, both choosing silence in the name of protection. Daniel stood slowly and walked toward the large window overlooking the platform. He placed his hand lightly against the cold glass. "I stayed here," he said, voice lower now. "Not because I couldn't leave, because I chose something steady." Elena joined him, standing a foot away. And was it enough? He didn't look at her immediately. "Some nights," he said. "No." The vulnerability in his voice was quieter than any apology. Snow scraped against the window in diagonal streaks. The world beyond was completely erased now. No tracks, no road, no lights from town. "We both made choices," she said softly. "We just never finished understanding them." Daniel turned toward her fully. "What are you afraid of now?" he asked. The question was different. Not about the past, about the present. Elena searched herself honestly. "I'm afraid," she said slowly, "that if I stay this time, it won't be because I'm running from something." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his mouth. "That's not fear," he said. "That's awareness." The storm howled again, but inside the station, something steadier had begun to take shape. Not forgiveness, not reunion, just truth, finally spoken in a room with no way out. And in the low amber light, they stood facing each other, not as the two people who broke apart under station lights 7 winters ago, but as two people who had survived what silence had done to them. The storm wasn't the only thing stripping everything down. This was the part where there was nowhere left to hide. The emergency lamps dimmed again, softer this time, as if the building itself were growing tired. Daniel checked the generator once more. The fuel gauge trembled just above empty. "An hour," he said quietly. "Maybe less." Midnight approached. Outside, the storm had stopped sounding violent. It no longer howled. It pressed, heavy, relentless, the kind of silence that feels deliberate. Elena sat on one of the wooden benches, her coat folded beside her. The station felt suspended in time, cut off, not just from the tracks, but from consequence. Daniel returned from the back room and sat down beside her this time, not touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the fabric of his coat. "I used to think," she said, "that love was a direction. Forward, always forward." "And now?" he asked. She watched the faint reflection of the emergency lights in the window. "Now, I think it's a place, and we kept leaving it." Daniel considered that. "I didn't want to chase you," he said. "I thought if I asked you to stay, you would, and then someday you'd hate me for it." She turned toward him. "I didn't want you to ask," she admitted, "because if you had, I might have chosen differently." The confession settled between them like something finally named. The station clock, stopped at 11:17, seemed to watch them from the wall. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She thought carefully before answering. "I regret not understanding myself sooner. Not regret for leaving, not regret for ambition, regret for silence." Daniel leaned back against the bench. "I regret believing that love has to be selfless to be pure," he said. "I thought stepping aside was noble." She studied his profile in the low light. "And now? Now I think love is staying in the room, even when it's uncomfortable." The generator hummed unevenly. The lamps flickered again. Elena felt the weight of the years compress, not erased, but reframed. "I didn't come back for closure," she said. "I didn't even know if that's real." He looked at her. "Then why did you come?" She held his gaze. "Because I wanted to know whether what we had was unfinished, or simply over." The words felt dangerous and honest at once. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat. For a second, she thought he might actually pull out one of the letters. He didn't. He only rested his hand there, a gesture, not a revelation. "I stopped writing them 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Not because I stopped thinking about you. Then why? Because I realized I wasn't waiting anymore." The admission struck her, not painfully, but clearly. "And now?" she asked. The lights dimmed lower. Shadows stretched longer across the floor. "Now I'm not waiting," he said, "but I'm not hiding either." Elena felt something inside her loosen. Not urgency, not longing, something steadier. She reached for his hand, not impulsively, not desperately, deliberately. His fingers closed around hers slowly, as if both of them were testing whether the contact belonged to the present or to memory. The storm outside had softened into a muffled quiet. Inside, the station felt like the center of something small and undeniable. "Midnight," she said softly. The generator coughed once. Daniel looked at her. "When the lights go out," he said, "there won't be another train until morning." She nodded. "I know." The last bulb flickered violently once, twice. The station fell into near darkness, lit only by a single remaining amber glow near the platform doors. They sat there, hand in hand, in the fragile light that refused to fully disappear. And for the first time since she stepped back into this building, neither of them was thinking about leaving. They were thinking about what staying would actually require. The final bulb surrendered at 12:03. Darkness did not arrive violently. It settled. For a moment, the station existed only as breath and presence. The storm outside had thinned into a distant whisper. Snow no longer struck the windows. It simply rested against them. Daniel stood slowly and reached for the small oil lantern stored beneath the counter, something he kept for nights when the system failed entirely. He lit it with steady hands. A soft flame bloomed between them. In its glow, the station looked almost beautiful, stripped of function, reduced to wood, glass, and two people who had finally stopped protecting themselves from each other. Elena watched the light move across his face. "Morning will come," he said quietly. She nodded. Yes. Neither of them rushed to define what that meant. The world outside was erased for now. No departures, no arrivals, no options disguised as inevitabilities. Just stillness. She stood and walked toward the platform doors. Snow had sealed them partially from the outside. The glass was opaque with frost. Daniel joined her. For a long moment they stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at a world reduced to white. "I used to think I had to choose between who I was becoming and who I loved," she said. "And now?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "Now, I think I just didn't know how to hold both." He didn't answer with reassurance. He didn't promise that this time would be different. He simply reached for her hand again, not to keep her, just to stand with her. The lantern flame wavered softly. Outside, the storm had stopped entirely. Silence, clean, patient, settled over the town. Somewhere in the distance, beneath layers of snow, the tracks still existed. The world would resume. Trains would run again. Choices would return with daylight. But for now there was only this room, this hour, this unguarded truth. Elena leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. Not as a declaration, not as surrender, as alignment. The past had not disappeared. It stood behind them like tracks buried but intact. The future did not announce itself. It waited, and as the lantern light traced gentle shadows across the station walls, neither of them spoke about staying. They did not need to. Outside, the first faint hint of dawn began to soften the horizon. Barely visible through frost, the station lights would come back. Trains would move. But when morning arrived, it would not find them choosing out of fear, only out of awareness, and before the station lights ever flickered on again, they were already standing in the quiet certainty that some departures do not mean leaving, and some returns are simply the courage to remain.
Thank you for listening. I'm grateful you chose to spend this time here. New stories arrive every week, and I hope you'll return for the next one.